join our host, Susan McDougall, already in conversation with Terry Bard, Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Pastoral Care Publications, Incorporated.
Right. Yes. Go
And,
ahead.
and so I had some experience doing that. And so while I was on the board of the Journal of Pastoral Care, within a short time I was elevated to president of the board because it rotated. And I was there for a couple of terms until I left because the organization that was sponsoring me wished to have another person in that. And I really hadn't thought much about the journal subsequent to that, but I had been involved in its leadership as well. And about 10 years later, maybe a little more, I learned that there was an opening for an associate editor to Orlo Strunk. And Orlo and I had a long history together in a variety of ways. And so I submitted my application, and I guess they had a long national search. And fortunately, I was blessed to be invited to take on the leadership. At that time, the journal was going through a lot of transitions, and as were a lot of the organizations in the pastoral care movement. And it led to some financial concerns and some publication concerns and needs for the journal to move well beyond its paper context into another model. And after about a year, I was asked to succeed Orlo in the position of managing editor, and with a specific task of bringing the journal into electronic form. I knew nothing about that, so it was a quick study and a painful one, although I gained a lot of interest. And I had actually presented this as the associate manager to the board. I had done some research and submitted several software companies that we might use, eventually deciding and suggesting to the board that they might want to take on the Public Knowledge Project, which they did adopt, which was able to get us online for almost no money as part of a scholarly project that they created. They're in Canada, and they created this model initially with San Francisco, University of San Francisco, to create its online publication. And so they were developing this as a public project. And we used that for many years until we realized that we really needed to become a little more robust and more flexible, and that we also wanted to take the mission that we already had and really expand it more. And we decided that perhaps one of the ways to help us and to help the field would be to really move toward a global partnership. And so we were sought out, and we sought out the potential partnerships with a variety of companies, international publishers. Eventually, we were really pursued, and we pursued as well, Sage Publication, which is well known in the field, and they were very excited to bring us aboard because they did consider the journal, and still do, as the fundamental primary publication, academic and professional publication in the field, and they wanted to add that to their portfolio. So that's how we got to where we are today. And in that shift, my position title only moved from managing editor, which was our older nomenclature, to the one that's used by the Sage Publications, which is editor-in-chief. But one of the things I did is by going with Sage, of course, we were a global journal already, but we were able to be more expansive to the rest of the world. And I also realized the tasks, while they were going to be different as a partnership with Sage Publications, that we also needed to make what we do internally a little more robust, because the journal is really, it's not really a smorgasbord as much as a forum for those interested in the arts and sciences of pastoral care and counseling. And that forum includes people who are well beyond people who are simply chaplains or psychologists, includes social workers, nurses, doctors, and others. So I increased our peer reviewers to include people from those disciplines, because we were getting submissions from those, but also to enhance our our other offerings, aside from scholarly articles and research articles, we certainly want to present reflection opportunities. So I created a reflections editor, at that time a poetry editor as well, and a book review editor. So rather than it being housed in me alone, as it was with Orlo, as having to do all of those tasks, I decided I needed a bigger team, and that it would also make the journal a little more robust. So we have those positions as part of the oversight of the editorial office of the Journal of Pastoral Care and Counseling.
You mentioned the mission of the journal a little bit, that it had a mission and then you sort of expanded the mission. Could you talk about that a little bit?
I didn't expand the mission, because the mission, that's done by the board, but it's really to produce, its mission is to produce research and scholarly articles to the field of pastoral care and counseling, also to support those within associations and those serving in roles such as chaplains, to give them material that will not just inform them, but nourish and nurture them as well. And that's part of the, it's stated more precisely in our letterhead and on our website, but it's really, as I said, a multifaceted goal that we try to achieve. And so by expanding that and really opening it up in a very formal way globally, which it's done with SAGE, because if you view the journal in the last several years, we've had more publications from overseas, we've had reflections from overseas. The books we review are selected with the goal of enhancing the work that's done by those in the field of pastoral care. There's so much produced nowadays, and some of it deserves attention and it will get reviewed elsewhere. But we want to review just those things that we think are going to be of specific interest, since we feel, maybe rightfully or wrongly so, that what we choose to do does have some weight with those who are in the field and merit, and therefore we want to be very careful about what we offer to our sponsoring organizations and our readership abroad, the kinds of materials that will be helpful to them.
This work really gives you such a bird's eye view into what's going on in pastoral care, and over a long period of time since you've been there. So where are we going in the field?
Well, I wish I could project that concisely. The evolution has been rather dramatic, certainly since the 70s and 80s, and particularly in the last 2 decades. In fact, knowing that, we don't publish just the journal because we're part of a larger organization, which is the Journal of Pastoral Care Publications. And we produced books and monographs in the course of many years. And we did produce a book a number of years ago, which looked at the development of the field of pastoral and chaplaincy care and counseling up to around 1975. That we decided we need to bring things up to date and even project a little bit into the future, going to your questions. So we've commissioned and pretty much finished a book. We have an author, Professor Razan Karaban, who's written a wonderful book that takes us from 1975 up till now. We're not yet quite ready to publish it, and since things have changed even more dramatically in the past year, we're going to have to add some pieces to it. But our hope is within the next year or two, we'll have a new volume out called Not Head and Heart, but now perhaps Body and Soul, that will really begin to answer the question that you have and point to the directions of where things are going. A lot of this, of course, is predicated on the fact that what was initially the focus, actually in the very early days, primarily in a formal way, within the Christian community and the hospital work, which is 1920s to 30s, and certainly with Boyson from 47 on, when the journal was developed. There was another journal created at the same year called the Journal of Clinical Pastoral Work, but that didn't last very long. That was sponsored by the Council of Clinical Training for New England in New York City. The more New England branch, which was the Institute of Pastoral Care, created the Journal of Pastoral Care. But it's expanded to certainly in the 1960s and 70s as things began to become more focused on what societies called the spiritual,
Yes.
and probably less parochial model. We saw parochial organizations evolve, but also the expansion of pastoral care into a formalized profession, not simply with training, but with certification and other kinds of dimensions. We see that it moved not out of the religious community itself alone, but inclusive of it, but even beyond that, to people who have an interest in this arena, but are not necessarily formally trained in theological and philosophical structures of formal religious organizations. And that, with a robust social and geopolitical community interested in things of the spirit in the last certainly 20 or 30 years, we see the expansion of these organizations and therefore of people doing this kind of work. Even people who are doing it now, not simply as primary vocations, but people who are doing it as secondary or even tertiary vocations along the way. We see that this kind of work is becoming more saturated within the public in a variety of ways. And the kinds of institutions and locations in which pastoral care is taking place, spiritual care is taking place, is no longer simply within hospitals alone. In fact, it's becoming less so within hospitals alone. It's moving toward, of course, hospital ancillaries like hospice and things like that, but it's always been in correctional institutions and in educational institutions, but even beyond that, it's into the police, it's into the business community. The National Association of Business Counselors, chaplains, represents that. They've been at that business for a long time. That the nature of pastoral and spiritual care is blossoming at one level, and therefore it's being integrated into society at one level. It creates other challenges because the funding for this is diminishing. It's being more diluted, and it's changing in that direction. Also, what we've seen is that with the late 60s and early 70s, and the evolution of no longer having a gender differentiation in people doing that kind of work, that we see a lot more people of varying backgrounds, religious backgrounds, gender backgrounds, participating in this kind of activity in all sorts of different ways. So I can't tell you where it's going, but I can tell you that the shape is very, very different. How it's going to survive, I think, is one of the bigger questions. And that's a very pragmatic and practical question, because as you expand and in some ways saturate, but also dilute what was originally a more limited professional model,
Yes.
the ability to support that financially, to take it seriously, and to understand its professionalism becomes more challenging. So that's the dynamic I think we're dealing with. If I had a crystal ball, I'd share the results with you, but I don't.
Yes, it sounds, I've heard this sort of debated. It sounds, at which side do you come down on in this movement toward a more secular chaplaincy, a more spiritual chaplaincy, a lot of different.
I've wrestled with it, and fortunately I have several hats, so it's not going to affect me financially very much. But I don't have an answer to your question. I have a conflict within me, if I can say that. Maybe it's because I'm older, because I came out of more limited focus traditions, that I've been trained, as most of the people my age, and formally in philosophy and in theology. There's a rigorous background that we have that probably perhaps doesn't even apply into the new spirituality unless you want to look at senior advisors, so that the people doing the work are coming with very different portfolios than those who started out with me. So from a theoretical and philosophical perspective, I think it makes absolute sense that this should be part of an expanding component of society. And I've always advocated, in fact, when I was a director of pastoral care and counseling at a large academic medical center, I didn't feel that the need was necessarily to bring on more chaplains, although the center ultimately thought that because they were looking at numbers. I felt that people from backgrounds such as mine had the ability to take other professionals, physicians, nurses, and others, and to train them to do what we're doing, which is actually, if you look at it, perhaps a conflict of interest, because I was actually saying, you know, you can do almost the same work that I'm doing if you're trained that way, and that would be wonderful. It will add to your portfolio. But what it also does is dilutes the ability of an institution to support a person such as me or such people like that, because they can say, if others are doing it, then why should we support that? And that goes to the other piece of the conflict, and that is, it's really hard to claim what are really professional salaries and support once you dilute a field in that way. The resources are not there. People don't necessarily look at it in the same way as another professional when that happens, so that where I was head of a chief of a department, which is the same as surgery and neurology or whatever. That doesn't happen these days because this work is not regarded in that kind of way. It's more in the element of the social services that it's providing support. And these are not funded in the same way that the others were, and you don't get that kind of subvention. So theoretically, I think that the expansion is wonderful, natural, and a philosophical, I think, logical next progression for the field at one level. On the other hand, the dilution of the professionalism as it used to be understood is really problematic, especially for people who would like to make this a formal, their primary mode of income, because people are not going to subvent it in quite the same way that they used to. And that's a challenge. For some people now who are coming as second or third professions in their lives, or they may not need to be fully supported, it's wonderful, and they're able to provide this kind of time. So while I don't have an answer, I think that there's this inherent conflict which is yet to work itself out.
I think you stated it more beautifully than I've ever heard it before. I think you have looked at all of the aspects of that in a way that made it more clear for me. We have a huge world-renowned cancer center where I work, adjacent to the hospital where I work. And it's a great cancer center, but they use social workers for spiritual care. They don't hire chaplains there. So, well, yes, I've had to really, I've done a lot of arguing on behalf of the chaplain role in addition to that. But I've been
it's hard. And what's happened as a result of that is that in many instances, one of the reasons is that the social work is built into the reimbursement framework, which is not unless you're doing teaching, so you get some money back for training. And so what's happened in many locations is that those who are doing spiritual pastoral care become now subsumed within the Department of Social Work. And so they report now to the Director of Social Work rather than to someone else. That was a struggle that I went through even in the transitions when I finally retired from the position I was in, where I was hired certainly as a chief, as I suggested. I reported to the CEO. Yes. And that's very different than when you report to another manager, yet another one down the ladder. And it shows you how the shifts have taken place in society. And part of it comes from, I think, the natural progression of every organization. And here there's no indictment of any single one spiritual care organization. We have so many now. If you looked at Comus 88, you would see that there are 20 or 30 different organizations. There's even more so now, although there's probably very few that are primary. What you look at is the field is expanded in many ways, but not without some forethought. But I don't know if it provided the forethought of what would we be doing to the profession in this expansion. And I think that's, I suppose it was almost hard because it was hard to harness anybody. Each organization was going out on its own. Yes. But had it done so at the ab initio, it may have reframed itself a little bit differently. I don't know. It's sort of like what I think happened in medicine from a different perspective when I think that physicians who I work with daily, and I'm still a professor in medical school for many years, yes. Is that I think that they step back from some of the management components and let places like Blue Cross Blue Shield begin to be the determinants for some of the medical care. And it was only later when the doctors wanted to wrestle back some of their autonomy and their responsibility that now it was compromised because it's all part of the insurance yes. component of society, which many doctors, to their chagrin, often reduces their autonomy. It reduces their ability to care for their patients the way they want to. And so I think they step back a little bit there too as an organization. And as far as I know, there's no organization that goes into business with the goal of going out of business. And so it just gets bigger. There actually was one that I joined years and years ago, which had a sole goal to go out of business. And that was called the Clergy Consultation Service for Problem Pregnancies. This is before Roe v. Wade.
Yes.
And the goal there, and we all knew we were doing clandestine activities, that we could go to jail for whatever we were doing, but we thought it was appropriate and proper to provide counsel and support and even resources for young women who were going through problem pregnancies and perhaps their partners or their families. And the goal was that if legislation would come along, such as Roe v. Wade, to make it possible for women to get the kind of attention they wanted, that we would disband. And we actually did that with a side. There were 2 or 3 in the country, one of which is here in Boston, that evolved into something else. But that goal was to disband. That's the only one that I know that went into business with the goal of going out of business.
And that's a great thing. Isn't it something? How many people were involved in that organization?
I don't know. Someone was doing a poll and I lost the email, so I didn't get a chance to participate.
Yes.
I think there were only several hundred of us.
Yes.
We trained at the University of Chicago for that.
Wow. That's really something.
And yeah, there were several hundred. We were scattered around the country.
Yes.
We sent women, unfortunately, sometimes resources in Mexico and Tennessee. I remember in China that when people had really problems, and these were expensive, they were traumatic, it was difficult, and some people, of course, decided to continue their pregnancies, and we got them into homes, the Chittenden homes and things like that, so they could go there for their care and support. So it was a very kinetic time, as you can imagine. I'm an activist, that you figured out.
I think I saw that. This may be, if this question is too broad to answer, you can just tell me. I was wondering if there was an article, a poem, a piece of work that you, that comes to your mind as something that really meant something to you in the journal. As you're reading, as you're looking through, is there something that pops in your mind and you say, that really was wonderful, it meant a lot to me?
I can't, because it happens frequently.
Oh, good.
I can tell you, and it's because I really, I want to push authors, because as a journal, we're a recipient. We don't promote things. Yes. So we have to manage what comes our way. We could go after certain themes, and we're wrestling with that, but we really want to serve the community that's doing things. Not everybody is a writer. And we're very rigorous. In order to retain our professional and academic standing, and a lot of people use the journal and publish in the journal because they're moving toward academic advancement.
Yes.
But so we're very careful. You can't be a sloppy writer. You have to be a good thinker. Your work has to go through the standards and muster of what is good to demonstrate and has been done in the tools that we have nowadays, statistically, in terms of research, in terms of all the rest, that we have high standards, but we will also help support writers. We want to help them. We don't want to chastise them. We want them to get comfortable in writing. That's why I've come to CASC and other organizations to help them learn how to write. So it's a different answer to a question you didn't answer. But you didn't ask. But an article of recent that comes to mind, because I've been trying to, one of the things as an editor, I feel blessed because I guess I'm entrusted to see a bigger picture than some other people often see, is that what's happening in our society is very difficult in a variety of ways to put your hands around it, but you know where there's no continuity. And so I've been trying for a number of years to really try to encourage people involved in correctional institutions to begin to write about their experiences, what they've done. I did a little bit of that in my career, very little, but some, so I'm not totally naive to it. But to get to know more about that and the tools that are used and what's helpful, and recognize that people are going to be transitioning. Not everybody is there for their lifetime. So people are transitioning into society, and there's no continuity or conduit,
Yes.
which provides continuity of spiritual and pastoral support and counseling for these people that's orchestrated formally from one place to another to another. We've had a couple of articles that we've published this year, one in Israel and one more local, about the care, pastoral care in penal institutions, what works, what doesn't work, what kinds of things were of concern to them, how they find meaning for these people, and how perhaps some of the things that they did, the interventions they did and what they did clinically, was actually able to help a person move to the next step of moving out into society.
Yes.
And publishing that to me is very important, because I want people in the field who are readers of the journal to see that, because then they hopefully will begin to look at this population and write about what they might have done in terms of integration. So those two articles that we published this past year were very meaningful to me, because I think what they're doing is setting a stage for hopefully another group of writers and people in pastoral and spiritual care who may be caring for these people, to see what they've done in that transition. And I always encourage these writers to when they write, is to say, well, if you're doing a research study, what does that point to in terms of next questions for further study? With the goal, if they articulate that in their articles, that someone might pick it up who's involved in it and say, hey, I'm doing that, or I'm interested in doing that. Let me go and do that. Work with someone who's a good counselor, guide, or guru for them, and write about it so that we can learn and publish it. So that's an area that is of concern to me. I can also point to articles that are happening in other countries that we've done too. I mean, we had two of our books that we published in the past, we've signed over to be translated into Korean, because there's a large market of people doing what we're doing in Korea. I hope that more and more will want to translate some of our work, if they're not native English speakers, into a language that they want. We get a couple of pennies for it, but the field gets much more. Yes. So that's what we're all about. That's part of the mission. I'm sorry if I go into a great deal.
No, that's a great answer. I have a great affinity for that population. It's wonderful to hear you talk about it. Underserved population of people in our jails and prisons in America. So that's a wonderful goal. You said you might go after themes. You were thinking about themes, and you said you haven't made that decision, but what themes? What themes are you thinking about?
there are a number of themes. One of the things that we are able to do now with SAGE, which we haven't done, and frankly, I have to be able to have more time with the journal. I'm doing many other things, and that's something the journal and I need to negotiate. And I'm trying to set stages what grows beyond me. But we're able actually to create themes of already published materials, for example, with the journal, with the SAGE, because they're able to look at our 70 years of history. They've got that whole archive. It's archived elsewhere, but they have that. And we can pick out articles relating to any one particular theme, and we can do a special theme without actually getting new material if we wanted to.
Yes.
In other words, the oldies but goodies within a certain framework. We can also go after new themes. I think one of the themes that I would think for the field would be useful is looking at this nettlesome area that I described to you, where my natural philosophical and theoretical yearnings is for the expansion of this field, and yet there's limitations at the other end in the whole nature of what is professionalism and what's reasonable. I mean, if everybody's going out and charging nothing for their services, it's wonderful. People are getting services. One can interpret that and say, well, that's doing a divine mission. But I come from a tradition, certainly in Judaism, that says it's no particular honor to be poor or to starve. And does that mean that we create and have diluted a field so that it's lost its professional significance and importance to be the equivalent of the other people who are caregivers? That's a very big theme for me because I'm troubled by it. And I think that the field should be troubled by it because down the road, even right now, I think it's a current problem. We need to look at that seriously. Shouldn't people be hired in the same fashion as other professionals? And shouldn't there be more opportunities? And how can we make that happen? Or should we just say, let's scuttle that? That's not the value system.
Yes.
I don't have the answer, but that's a theme. The other theme, of course, is you're talking about is continuity within society. In other words, what are examples, and do themes of examples? The penal institution model, the correctional institution model is looked at as how do we do from community to institution and back to community kind of thing.
Yes.
The other theme is how do you integrate non-traditional Western models with alternative models. We've published articles which look at Native American care and what kinds of things are done there. We're a community that is a smorgasbord, certainly in America, of great cultural diversity. And I don't think the answer is total assimilation. That's not healthy for anybody, and it makes a very nondescript gray community. So how do you celebrate that, and how do you integrate some of these other things and not lose your specificity at the same time? That's another theme. So you can see that I've come up with a bunch of them.
Yes.
Once we go there, I will not be at a loss. The most difficult thing will be if we do go in that direction, is to say, which one do I tackle first?
It is so nice to have talked with you today. What a lot to think about. It's really wonderful, and thank you so much for coming and being with us today.
Well, it's an honor to do so. I want to wish you all the best in this effort. I think that what you and all of the other organizations and associations bring to the field is something that's hard to translate into actual words. It does bring a certain humanistic, more humble kind of model to what's going on in society, and the constant reminder that what is meaningful is important.
Yes. Thank you. We'll end with that quote right there. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.